the US Middle East peace envoy Steve Witkoff, as I said, he's on the Trump administration, but he has decided to bring his team home from those talks for a Gaza ceasefire. They were hoping to get together to get that 60-day ceasefire ongoing. But in a statement, the peace envoy said that the latest response from Hamas clearly shows a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire. Barbara Leaf, former Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East back in January, has been talking on Times Radio Drive to John Pienaar. She said negotiations would still take some time.
There was a proposal put forth this past week that Israel accepted, that Hamas came back with edits, if you will, counter proposals, which the Israelis have deemed unacceptable. But yes, chances are it's an opening bid, and that will just require further negotiation effort.
Well, both sides have come back and been recalled from those negotiations. More than 100 aid organisations at the same time have warned of mass starvation in Gaza. The UN says it's got 6,000 trucks worth of aid waiting for permission to enter Gaza. And it's warning that the hunger crisis has never been so dire. Starvation is here now. It's not coming, it is here now. Joining me, Alistair Burt, former Minister of State for the Middle East and a distinguished fellow at RUSI. Alistair, this story, it just keeps perpetuating the terrible scenes of what's happening in Gaza, the starvation and desperate people. Do you think there is any hope of ceasefire talks being continued, picking up again and maybe making some progress?
Yes, Carolyn, I think the honest answer to that is yes, as Barbara Leaf suggested, and I suspect she's quite close to some of the people who are involved. This may be a break or a pause, but that view is shared by others who have commented tonight, who have said this doesn't mean it's a complete breakdown. An Arab diplomat is quoted as saying that he thought that Hamas's response was sufficiently constructive to allow things to go ahead. It's very difficult in a negotiation process to know quite what is going on, and what reports that come out to the outside may be designed to add pressure to one side or the other. But what, of course, is terrible is the backdrop to this. This isn't a negotiation between states in a circumstance where life is going on and it's a reasonable discussion. This is a negotiation between the terror group Hamas and Israel, with the backdrop of everything that we have seen recently in terms of the almost total destruction of Gaza, the immense loss of life, the tremendous suffering now because of the lack of food aid getting in. And that should be the backdrop that should encourage every single party to this negotiation to stop and say enough is enough, and get both the ceasefire and the talks about what is going to happen after that very much back on track.
Yes, and this is the backdrop is the health workers, journalists as well in Gaza dealing with hunger because of the Israeli blockade. Will Israel be forced to lift that blockade, even if there isn't some sort of resolution with Hamas? And it does seem a sticking point is the continued presence of the Israel Defense Forces in Gaza. And the supply and distribution of aid, of course, is constantly, it seems, the subject of wrangling.
It is, but we should separate the provision of food for an occupied area from discussions about a potential ceasefire in relation to the conflict. Israel is the occupying power. It has a legal obligation to make sure that food is getting into Gaza. But as we know, there is dispute on both sides about whether this is being delivered. And frankly, it's very difficult to know what the situation is. There's no independent reporting allowed by Israel into Gaza. But when so many different aid agencies who don't have the political bias that is alleged towards all of them, but when they report as they do about the inability to distribute aid, what they consider to be the failure of the new aid mechanism that requires Palestinians in Gaza to go to particular distribution points, the numbers of people who have been killed through that process, you have to take their word for what is happening. And that means that that issue should be dealt with quite separately from what's happening in relation to the ceasefire talks, which are about a different set of issues, release of prisoners, release of hostages, whether a ceasefire is permanent or just for 60 days. There's a lot to be discussed there, but the immediate pressure on food aid should be the number one priority. That should be dealt with quite separately from the ceasefire negotiations, in my view.
And also separate from that, you know that there has been a letter from a number of former ambassadors and senior figures saying that now is the time to declare a state or support for a state of Palestine. Of course, the British government is resisting naming a state of Palestine. What do you think?
Well, I think the argument has changed and pivoted in relation to this. It's always been the case that the British government has seen the recognition of the state of Palestine as part of a process. It's an important gesture of the United Kingdom to make, but it is a gesture in the circumstances. Spain and Ireland recognised the state of Palestine just a few months ago, and it had no effect on what was happening on the ground. But if the United Kingdom, France, and potentially Canada were to do this, this would be a significant signal. And what it would be saying is, unless there is a state of Palestine recognised, which of course is part of the two-state solution, it is not a gift to terrorists in any way. It's part of a two-state solution. If a state was recognised by a group of countries together, then that would be a powerful signal to Israel to say the long-term future of this is not, as some of the extremists in the Israeli government are saying, a process of annexation of the West Bank, a process of resettlement of Israelis into Gaza. It's going to be different. And that would be quite a profound statement to make. Whether or not it's the right thing to do just at the point of these discussions is very difficult to tell. What is significant is, as you were discussing with Willie Rennie, the position in the United States here, it could be the most crucial, because if President Trump decides that he's being led by the nose by Prime Minister Netanyahu, he is the person who can say, enough, stop this, agree the terms for a ceasefire now, and let's get on with it. Otherwise, his hopes of peace in the Middle East and a new Middle East that he is so keen to champion are just being trodden into the dust. And
in the middle of all of this, of course, we mustn't forget the hostages. And there are plenty of people now in Israel who are saying, look, let's just get some sort of agreement, even if we don't pull out of Gaza completely, but just anything that we can do to get the hostages back. And so many of them are saying that they worry about Israel now being a pariah state, you know, that so many of the allies who previously had great sympathy for what happened on the 7th of October are now losing patience with the Israeli leadership. And in the meantime, those families are still suffering that huge loss.
That's absolutely right. The hostage families are, of course, terrified that there is not a priority in the Israeli government to return the hostages. That is why they've been out on the streets protesting. But their concern about where Israel is going is shared by many in Israel. And before the attacks come in, saying this is again all a boost for Hamas and for terror, Ronan Bar, the head of the intelligence agency, he was the one who said some months ago that Israel is in danger of looking like a pariah state, like South Africa. The Golan, the opposition spokesman, has spoken again recently about the damage being done to Israel's reputation in so many different ways. He said, and he said it was on its way to looking like a pariah state. What Ronan Bar had said was the attacks by settlers in the West Bank were doing indescribable damage to Israel. And so many Israelis and writers outside, if the polling that was recently done in Europe showed that a favourable rating for Israel was now at its lowest ebb since this polling began. Only 13 to 20% of people in 6 different European countries had a favourable view of Israel, compared to 63 to 70% who felt that who had an unfavourable view towards Israel. The damage to Israel has been colossal. The boost to Islamic terrorism has been huge from what they are seeing on videos. And that damage alone worries those states that support the existence of the State of Israel have always stood with Israel in relation to the terror attacks that it's faced, but now fear that Israel is going in the wrong direction. And those views are shared by those in Israel. That is another reason to get a ceasefire and start the discussions that must be about the future of Gaza and the future of Israel, because unless there are two states, a secure Israel and a justice for the Palestinians, we won't see a resolution of this.
But again, we've been talking there about the criticism of Israel, but Hamas obviously shares it is equally responsible for what is going on, in terms of, the innocents that have been caught up in the slaughter and starvation.
Of course, Carolyn, you're absolutely right. And criticism of Israel is not designed in any way to suggest that anything that happened on October the 7th was in any way justifiable. There are those who will make that case based on the resistance movement and what Hamas stands for. But I can't think of a democratic politician in the West who would support what happened on October the 7th. And worrying about the reprisals and what Israel has done since in no way is a justification or an excuse for anything of Hamas. And of course, the seizure of hostages, the return of hostages is absolutely essential. But there are other facts to consider. The Palestinian prisoners, those who have been taken since October the 7th, those under 18 who are in Israeli jails, what is happening on the West Bank, what has been happening in Jerusalem. These are not things that can be left to one side because they are vital to a conclusion in this. And raising them is not a defense or a support of Hamas in any way. It is saying there are things that need to be addressed. And in doing so, it's not being hostile to Israel, but it is a warning to Israel from those inside Israel that these things cannot be forgotten. But the immediate concern is the death and destruction in Gaza, the need to bring that to a stop, to get the hostages back and to get the ceasefire talks on track. That's where I think the negotiators should be heading for. And I don't think it's necessary over those talks.
I hope you're right. Alistair Burt, thank you very much indeed for talking to us this evening.